to another episode of Curious. I'm your host, Sharon Mosley. On today's show, we continue our discussion about Zen with my returning guest, Kaku Robert Walker Gunn, who is the guiding teacher at Empty Hands Zen Center in New Rochelle. Welcome, Kaku.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
So, please excuse me if I can't really see you because I put my contacts in the wrong eye. So what would Zen practice have to say about that?
Switch them.
That was good. So we just came back from a 3-day retreat. And what do we call such a retreat?
We may call it a session. It's a period of intensive Zen practice.
And why do we go on retreats and what happens there?
We go on a retreat because life is full of advances, and our advances wear us out. And the more we're advancing, the more we exhaust our energy trying to get somewhere. And on a retreat, we stop and think about what we're doing with our lives and our energy, how we're spending our time, what's important. So we call into question the advancing ways that we have of living our lives and reflect on whether it really is being true to our values.
Okay. Now, can anybody do a retreat, or do you need say it again, a session? Can anyone do a session, or do you need some type of training?
So, you know, when I was a kid, I used to go on hikes. And that's what I called it. It was hikes, you know, into the countryside. And I would pack a bag with a book, usually a Bible. And I would go off into woods and streams and find a place to read and just enjoy myself. Well, that was a retreat. And I had lots of them as a kid. And as an adult, you're supposed to go to work and spend most of your time, energy, and everything trying to work hard so that you can have enough to live on. And at some point, you ask the question, well, what am I doing this for? Is it getting me where I want to go? Or am I doing it for some reason that maybe fits society's view of what I should do, but doesn't fit my view of what my life is about? So a retreat is a time to step back, to reflect, to kind of listen to the inner voices that we don't pay attention to so much, and let go of the voices that are clamoring constantly for us to work harder, move faster, get more done. You know, the list of commands we have in between our ears is pretty constant and unending.
Now, when you say the inner voice, you're not talking, what do you mean by that? Are you talking about the voices in your head? I'm not talking about someone with a mental illness, but what inner voice are you talking about? Are you talking about that's not clear to me. When you say inner voice, if I'm not a practitioner, that's not clear to me at all.
So, just to give an example, most of us have a lot of shoulds that go around in our heads. You should be doing this, you should be doing that. You should be this way, you should not be that way. So all these shoulds drive us. And when we go on retreat, we listen for a different voice. We listen for a voice that maybe says, I'm tired, or I'm angry, or I feel hurt, or I feel weak, So we listen for the voice that we don't often listen to when we're so engaged and busy with our lives.
So then what happens when you're meditating and those things come up like they do on retreat? What do you do with that? When I'm feeling angry, what do you do with that? I'm feeling uncomfortable, what do you do with that?
So we pay attention to it and investigate it. So if I'm feeling angry, what am I feeling angry about? Usually a scene will come to the mind that exemplifies what the anger is about. Probably it's an argument with someone, even if it's an argument with myself. And so you look at the source of the anger and you ask yourself, is this anger helpful or is this anger extra?
Okay.
Extra means that you're investing energy in something that drains you without giving anything back.
But doesn't anger give you something back?
Well, it stirs your blood for a while.
Yeah, I find it as it drives you to some place, but when you get there, then you're kind of like, now what?
So I'm not sure what you have in mind about where you get.
Well, that's the thing. So for example, I'll give you an example. So you're an advocate, and so your dissatisfaction about something may drive you to, I don't know, protest or drive you to take some action. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It drives you to take some action, but once you've taken the action, what's your plan after that? So that's what I mean by anger. I'm not talking about really destructive anger, but perhaps all anger is destructive, I don't know. But sometimes anger will drive you to an action, and then what do you do once you get there?
So actually, you're making a very excellent distinction between two kinds of anger. One kind of anger is in reaction to something that we see as happening to us. Maybe we feel we've been cheated or somebody's, had it in for us or something like that. And so we're reacting to some level of being hurt. There's another kind of anger that comes from recognizing that there's something that needs to be done. There's something positive and constructive that needs to be done, and that's, for me, your example of protest or demonstrations is an example of that. The anger is the driver that motivates us to seek justice and seek peace and harmony. So in that sense, there's a useful anger that gives us motivation to take action.
So maybe that's a better explanation. It's motivating,
Right.
but once the anger is dissipated, maybe you can't think clearly enough for creating a plan to do some positive change beyond the protest or whatever the action you've taken is.
Well, we live in interesting times, as some
That's
people
true.
say, because there's plenty of angry people in the country right now, and indeed in the whole world. There are not many people who are happy with everything that's going on in our society now. So the anger is, I would say, quite rampant. And this applies to all points of view on the spectrum. So we're living in a very angry time.
So if you're not a practitioner, how do you experience that silence that brings people together and that is intimate, as we spoke about during the retreat? Maybe you can explain what intimacy means, because I think for myself, it was an experience, but I couldn't put a word on it. You feel connected to the people that you're sitting with, even though you may not know them personally, but there's some connection that happens over time.
Yes, that's true. So on our retreat, we were in silence for the whole time, you know, with just a few words here and there about directions and so forth. But mostly we were in silence for 2.5 days, right? And during that time, it helps us to quiet a lot of busyness voices and to open up a deeper level of our own hearts to things that matter to us. And as we do that, you know, it all depends on what it is that's coming up. But sometimes things come up that are very reassuring and peaceful, and sometimes things come up that are pretty upsetting. And we say to ourselves, oh, that's why I didn't want to come here, you know, because I'm getting upset. And I try to stay not upset at home, and why do I come here and then get upset, you know? So, well, the point is, there's something to be learned from our upsetment. So when we are on retreat, we have time to pay attention to what's upsetting to us, and to ask ourselves, are we living according to our deepest values?
And how do you find your deepest values? I know there are Buddhist values, and would you care to speak about a few of them? And yes.
Well, let me start with a little bit different answer to the question.
Sure.
When we sit in Zazen, Zazen means sitting Zen. And when we're sitting, what's going on is we're hearing our mind, we're hearing our thoughts, we're thinking our thoughts and recognizing them, and we constantly are in the business of letting those thoughts go. So we may call it emptying the mind, but the mind never empties entirely. You know, it's always something there. But it does slow down over the course of a retreat.
I think that's what, when I speak to people about Zen practice, I think they believe that your mind should just not think, it should be clear and there's nothing there, and that's what Zen meditation is, so they can't do it.
It's confusing because that's impossible. And we do talk about emptying the mind, but it never gets really empty. You know, it's always busy. But it is possible for us to slow down in our thinking. And when we do that, it gives our hearts a chance to come to the surface.
Ah, that's very nicely put.
And that's when we experience more peace of mind. We may also experience hurts that we have ignored, not paid attention to, and resentments. And so our whole emotional life begins to kind of bubble to the surface. And all we do is pay attention to that and let it happen and recognize it and let it go.
So you mentioned earlier when we were talking, there are 3 types of retreats, or what are the 3 types of retreats? I guess the schedule different, or is the way that we practice during certain retreats different, or?
I'm not remembering the 3
Oh, okay,
types
it's
of
okay.
retreats. Yeah.
You said there are different. I'm assuming that there are retreats that are longer than we did. 1.5 hour.
Yes.
And then we did Kenyan, and then we went back. And so, to me, that was a little easier to do. Then I'm assuming there are longer hours. And could you talk about longer houred retreats. Could you talk about
Sure.
the different kinds?
Sure. So on this retreat that we were on, we sit in silence and stillness for 30-minute segments, and then we get up and we have a way of walking that lets the body move around, and that lasts for about 10 minutes. So we alternate between 30 minutes of zazen, being still, and 10 minutes of walking, right? And we repeat that pattern pretty much throughout the weekend, except when we're eating or we're on some kind of break, right? So other retreats can go as much as 50 minutes per time, and others sit in shikantaza, which is unlimited sitting.
Unlimited.
And so people stay without counting the time and just sit and meditate.
Who's counting the time then? Is there someone who's keeping track of the time, or that's the sitter's responsibility?
It can be the sitter's responsibility.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So for example, it's pretty common in our tradition that when someone wants to become a member of the Zen Center, that they will be asked to sit Tangaryo.
What's that?
And Tangaryo is a day of sitting where the person is reflecting on his or her intention in becoming part of the Zen Center and engaging Zen practice.
Wow.
And that is a day that has no separate segments timed. So you may start at 7 o'clock in the morning and you'll sit for, as long as you need to before you need a bathroom break. And you go take that, and then you come back and continue your sitting for, practically the whole day.
That brings up a question about sitting with difficulties, because I myself recognize that I had various issues with my body, of course, because I'm of a certain age. So it was very difficult, and I found myself wanting to sit like younger sitters, but that was just not happening.
Right.
So how does one deal with sitting through difficulties, or sitting with illness, or sitting with bodies that theoretically don't work anymore? You can't sit at all. You can't sit in a chair. You can't sit on a zabuton. You can't sit on a bench. You just can't sit. How do you still practice?
So, although the main way that we do meditation is in sitting, it's possible to do it standing up. It's possible to do it lying down. The point is to find a position that your body can be stable and comfortable in as much as possible.
So how do you sit lying down? Because I would think that would make you want to close your eyes and go to sleep.
Absolutely, yes. But there's this huge statue of the Buddha in India lying down.
Oh, that's true.
And, he's supposedly in deep meditation. So you have to bring the intention of meditating, not sleeping. And that's pretty tricky sometimes, because even sitting up, some of us doze off to sleep if we get the feeling that we need to. And so we accommodate is the simple answer to your question. If people have, so for example, you mentioned aging, people as they get older tend to have more and more difficulty being still, because the body starts to cramp up and different kinds of pain set in, and it becomes difficult even to stand up after that. So we do try to accommodate to whatever limits a person is working with. So for example, I have some people who have back trouble. So they'll sit in a chair for a certain amount of time, and then they need to stand. So they stand up.
So what are some of the ways that people can practice if they cannot sit, or if they can't sit?
So there's standing meditation.
And how do you do that?
So you can, instead of sitting on a chair, you can stand up and hold on to the back of the chair.
And then your eyes are still the same? And
then you still, yes, let your eyes fall to the floor and focus on your breath. So that's one of the things we haven't mentioned here, is that the basic way that we have of meditating is by focusing on the breath, lowering the eyes, and usually counting our breath. We count to 10 and then start all over again.
Okay, so when you find your mind distracted, do you have to start all over again, or how does that work? Because sometimes you'll be sitting, and then your mind starts thinking about something, and before you know it,
you're off to the races.
Yes.
Exactly, right. So we try to catch our minds when our attention starts to go off on a tangent, and we bring our attention back to the breath and start counting from 1 again.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit. We don't have that much time, but I want to talk about your documentary film that you did called One Heart, One Body. Why a documentary? Why did you do that documentary? How did that come about?
So this film was triggered by 2 things. First of all, I developed pancreatic cancer and had surgery, and basically have been recovering from that ever since. That was over 3 years ago. And the documentary was made because in that documentary there is a perspective shown that is Christian-based, and a perspective shown that is Buddhist-based or Zen-based. And so the film shows an interview with me and my Zen teacher, for example. It also shows me interacting with people in my congregation that I had a few years ago. So it's how does faith help us deal with illness and our mortality?
So, I only have 2 more minutes. So, how has faith helped you, and Zen practice helped you in your recovery?
Oy.
Oh, well, that's a long one. But you're Zen priest, Kaku. So, usually the answer is there's one word. But
So, well, in this case, the faith is in the practice. That the practice itself will bring healing and also bring fearlessness, so that whatever happens can be faced.
even when faced with pain?
Pain and dying and joy.
Joy. Kaku, I want to ask you, I'm about to take Jukai, and in Jukai you are given a Japanese name. And I had a problem with that. I wanted my name to be English. And I wanted my name to be English because that represents who I am. And because of my background and the difficulties my family and generations had to get me where I was, I wanted to maintain my American identity. And that's how I felt my name was. So
yes, you have asked for an English name rather than a Japanese name. And let me just say why Americans sometimes give Japanese names to Zen students. The reason is not only because Zen comes from Japan, but more importantly, because we look for a name that conveys an essence of the person and maybe helps them realize some qualities of their own that have not entirely been claimed or surfaced. So it helps bring out very powerful parts of the heart and mind of the student.
And then my question became, since Buddhism came from India and then went to China and then to Japan and Korea, or I may have it mixed up a little bit, and each time it fit into the culture that it found itself in, but that doesn't seem to be how it is in America. So that was another reason why I wanted the English name as well. And what is your comment about that?
That's happening more and more. There is what my first Zen teacher, John Dido Laurie, used to call Am-Zen.
What's that?
American Zen.
Oh.
So there is an American Zen definitely in the works, and it's coming into its own, and one of the ways that it's manifested is by people not using Japanese names anymore, but by using ordinary American language.
Not that I don't respect and honor the ancestors. I do, because I wouldn't know how to do the form, you know, or we wouldn't have any teachings. I understand that, but that was just my issue, as we have talked about.
Well, the other thing I want to say about it is that to give a student a Dharma name is the equivalent to a baptism.
Ah.
You know, that's an American tradition, you know, that if you're getting baptized in the Christian church, you are given a name, a special name in addition to whatever name you were given before, right?
Okay.
And the reason for that is to designate or denote a spiritual connection.
I see.
Or a spiritual source of your life.
Okay.
And so that's the same purpose as a Dharma name, whether it's from Japan or America. So,
thank you so much. You're always a pleasure to talk to.
you are too.
And I'm so glad you didn't ask me any probing questions. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. I see the wrap-up note. But I just want you to, could you just tell us what one of your practitioners, your parishioners said about you asking questions? What is it like?
Oh, he said that it was like having a question come that first felt like it was a soft pillow, but actually it was more like a 2-ton truck.
Yes, and that is you. And on that, we are going to say goodnight. Thank you so much, Kaku. Maybe you can come back and ask me one of those questions. I don't think so, but we'll see. Good night.